Okay, here we are. Welcome everyone in this POLIS Mobilizing Mobility webinar on data-driven urban mobility planning and citizen science, a match made in heaven. First, I would like to introduce our new webinar series by POLIS, is the Mobilizing Mobility webinar series. Following our successful webinars during September and October, POLIS brings you another month of engaging discussions and everything on urban mobility you have to know. These webinars provide a platform for urban transport stakeholders to learn, discuss, and share valuable experiences and knowledge on how to integrate new transport solutions in local mobility policies, thus moving from European research to actual deployment and concrete implementation on the ground. You can see the planning for November. We are going to have 6 webinars. After today, next Tuesday, we are going to talk about digital twins for urban planning. And then next Thursday, managing uncertainty when dealing with the future of mobility, following by the role of local authorities in energy systems for electric mobility, and finishing with mobility as a service, crossing model borders. I would encourage you to register for the future webinars as well. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Balázs Nemeth, a project officer working at POLIS Network. I'm going to moderate the webinar today. But before we would start, there are some onboard information for this webinar. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available after the webinar. Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking. And you can use the questions and answers box to write your questions. And at the end of the presentations, we are going to have at least 15-10 minutes to answer to all your questions. So I would encourage you to already start asking questions during the presentations. Today, we are going to feature 2 projects, WeCount and ClairCity, which you are going to hear more from the presenters. And I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Kris Vanherle, researcher at Transport and Mobility Leuven, Giovanni Maccani, senior researcher at Ideas for Change. His colleague is Lucia Errandonea, a civic engagement consultant at Ideas for Change. And last but not least, Enda, professor at the University of West of England. And the first presentation is going to be from Kris Vanherle. Kris Vanherle is a researcher at Transport Mobility Leuven and the project leader of WeCount. He is working for Transport Mobility Leuven as transport policy researcher more than 15 years. His core expertise is impact assessment of policy measures aiming to reduce the environmental impact of transport using transport emission modeling. To this end, he is also using citizen science techniques and has co-developed TerRAM project, in which a low-cost sensor is used to collect traffic data together with citizens. And this technology we brought to the European level, and he's going to talk about this project, WeCount. Kris, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Balázs. I will start sharing my screen here. Screen 2. Voila, if everything goes well, you should see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon also from on my behalf, very congratulations to most participants for overcoming the webinar fatigue, which we are probably all feeling now. So I will, like Balázs introduced, I will explain, give a very brief introduction to our WeCount project, empowered by TelRAM. WeCount is the project where also the partners which are attending here or the panelists are attending here are also involved in. So what's the WeCount problem? First, some abstract high-level elements. So our objectives, project objective, it's a 2-year project. And the idea is to involve or to enable citizens to initiate policy-making processes with fully automated measurement data in the field of mostly mobility and air quality data. So we basically want to empower citizens to collect traffic data themselves and help allow them to help building local policy, local traffic policy in their area. So we have sub-objectives in the sense that this will help citizens advance their knowledge. So you have lots of people who know a lot about, or who think they know a lot about mobility, but if you involve them much more directly in data collection, evidence collection, policy building, you will advance their knowledge to the benefit of all. We want to set up actually a citizen science ecosystem, which is self-sustaining. This is important. I think I will come back to that, a few of these elements later, specifically for involving citizens in the relation of traffic counting. We want to have low threshold technology. If you have citizen science with technology, technology is always an issue. So that's somewhat one of the objectives that we're focusing as well, that we reach a large audience. And we want to demonstrate that, in fact, you can have diverse applications of this technology. So we have 5 cases. And we will see in this project, we will demonstrate that for 5 specific cases, you can use this approach, citizen science with a low-cost sensor, to indeed enable policy change. And that's, of course, the final objective. So all the 4 objectives before are all irrelevant if you cannot achieve meaningful local policy change. So that's actually our main objective at the very end, but we need the other 4 to come there. So this is the high-level objective of the project. So how do we intend to do this with citizen science? So we want to have a very strong citizen science element. So citizens really at the heart of the discussion and the data gather, the evidence collection. And the focus is mostly on quantifying local transport. And to that end, we use existing technology, and that existing technology is Telram. To some maybe already know, but we'll dive a bit deeper into that. So those, so far, the abstract elements. I will dive into a bit of more concrete elements of our project. We'll give also some tangible results already. And I think Giovanni and Lucia will give some more explanation on specific the science activities. So first, the sensor technology. What are we using? I think most of the audience has probably some idea about collecting traffic data with different types of technologies. What we have developed with Telram, so WeCount and powered by Telram, is a low-cost traffic sensor, which is Raspberry Pi based, is a low-cost piece of hardware. This has been developed by TML over the past 1.5 years and has been deployed locally in Belgium, but also now in WeCount elsewhere. So we all use existing technology, so there's nothing rocket science style, but we have proven that with this very cheap technology, you can get reliable traffic counting data. We'll show you what you can do with this. Just want to flag here that the original sensor technology is Telram, and we use existing tools basically. There's a data platform, and we have an open data access policy as well, because data is collected by citizens. So this is what it looks like. I think if successful, I want to show you the website a bit more directly. So if all goes well, correct me or interrupt, please, if you cannot see the Telram website. So I will give you an example. This is how the Telram website looks. This is our landing page, and you can see the data from Telram devices on a map based, and you can zoom in on different. You can select one link. For example, if you click this one, you go to more data, and you can find the specific data for that road segment. What is this specific data? It's traffic counts for a set period, pedestrians, cyclists, cars, and large vehicles on a daily resolution, on an hourly resolution, so you can actually see the patterns here. This is a typical pattern that we see over a select period of time. We also have an indication of speed, so in 10 km/h bins. This is not super accurate, but at least gives an idea of speed regimes and exceedances. And this is again an aggregate with the direction as well. So for example, this is here the cars going left to right, this is cars right to left. Obviously, this street has some kind of peak traffic with a distinct pattern in the morning and the afternoon. So that's Telram. That's basically the technology that we use for WeCount, and we're applying this for 5 cases. I think I've shown this, so I'll not zoom into that more detail. So on the sensor side, the core is Telram, but the citizen science engagement strategy is a bit more complex. So I will go very quickly over this. I think Giovanni will and Lucia will do this more in detail, but we basically have 5 phases where you have first the community building. You need to identify people who want to be involved. You need to co-design. That means you need to involve the citizens directly in setting up your project. You can't just treat them as, let's say, free data generators. You really have to involve them. Then there's a data collection phase, and then it's not just collection, but also interpretation. And then the final step is reflection legacy, the interface with the policy. Want to flag the concept of the local champion. That's basically a volunteer which has either a very strong interest or very strong expertise, willing to help other participants as well. This is something which is very useful, but which we have found very useful in our projects. And I cannot stress this enough. It's a triangle, so you need to have the citizens participating. You need to have us, the scientific community or the project management, and policymakers. You need to have all three of them to make meaningful change. Obviously, the past year we've had this minor hiccup, which is called COVID-19. You know, citizen engagement activities are typically workshops, like you can see here on the picture. Not possible. So we have changed our engagement process to a hybrid approach where we do online recruitment and explanation with the citizens. This is challenging, but I think we are more or less managing. At least we have some delays with our project, but deployment of sensors and involvement of citizens is still somewhat working. I think Giovanni will dive into that further. I want to take a bit more time explaining on the pilot applications, and because I think this is probably the interesting part for the audience here. What can you actually do with this type of data? What has already been done, and what can you expect? So in WeCount we have 5 pilots. The first one is Leuven, which is, let's say, the home ground of Telegram. We had our first pilot here as well. And there the idea is to use Telegram devices to monitor the changes of the traffic flows if you change the circulation plan. So if you introduce one road streets or you do blockages. So there's a big policy focus now to reorganize, let's say, the traffic management. And Telegram is a tool to monitor what actually the impact is of these changes. You need before measurement and after measurements. In Dublin, there is a focus on deprived areas. That means, I mean, it's pretty well known, or there's some evidence that deprived areas suffer more from the adverse effects of traffic. So we can try to show this with traffic data. Cardiff has a bit of more focus on the air quality side. I will not zoom into that. That's more from Enda with UE. And Giovanni, as you may know, has quite a strong car-free center. So their shift is now a bit focusing more towards what are now the popular cycling routes. So traffic counting for cycling is a bit more difficult. There are fewer technologies, so Telegram could be an option. And the initial scope for Barcelona Madrid was to capture speeding, but we are rescoping there a bit also more towards traffic management observations. We'll now show you a few of our data stories, and you guys are getting the scoop of the first analysis of some impacts that we have measured with Telegram in Leuven. So in our WeCount case for Leuven, so we had sensors deployed in the course of September, October in this area here in Leuven. And that was as a preparation for the city authority to see what the impact is of some interventions. What we have seen, there are two examples. So first, there has been roadworks in one street. This is this one. So this is the data volume for this street. And you can clearly see that there was a big impact, obviously, in the traffic in this street. So this one here, when the roadworks were active. This was at the beginning of October. But we also can see there's no spillover effects to the others, which was somewhat surprising, but it can be. This is a fairly low traffic street, so you may not see the spillover effects on the other streets. What's more interesting is the second phase, where there was a blockage. I'm not 100% sure about the exact interventions, but we can at least see there was interventions done. There was 2 effects. There's a road blockage here and a road blockage here, or it was here, I'm not sure. Anyway, there were 2 interventions here, and you can clearly see that there are spillover effects all over the place. So you can see in 4 a big reduction here in the Burgstraat, it's called, and you can actually see spillover effects up to here and even here, because there's rerouting happening. This is a pretty well-known area in Leuven for spillover effects on wider areas. So it's not really red running, but it is being used as a not a destination route, but afwikkeling to serve also above local traffic. So these are the type of things that that Leuven wants to test, and Telegram, WeCount, so by involving the citizens, these are all citizen-owned Telegram devices, so people who have a device live here and have it on the street, and this type of data helps the city of Leuven to well, get informed policy. The second one, and then I'll skip very fast, is the speed. So we have a case in Leuven as well, where there was a very vocal citizen who complained about speeding in the street. This is in the Brusselse straat in Leuven. After some time, she was able to convince the local policymaker to install these digital sign with speed meters, and has been deployed. And you can actually see with the Telegram data that there was a huge effect, a huge impact. So the compliance level were at least a lot higher, not full, and there's still 35% non-compliant, but it used to be over half non-compliant. And what's very interesting here, and I want to stress this graph is not made by us, it's made by a citizen. So we did nothing. The only thing you have to do is to provide the citizen with the tools to do this. We can relate with the policymaker, but from that point onward, the citizen is empowered, engaged to make the change happen. So up to the analysis itself. So not just the data collection, but up to the analysis. This is something which we love. There's a few more examples. We have a cover tracker. We'll not dive into that. Obviously, you can also see the impact of traffic changes due to the lockdown. This is we've already presented in a previous webinar, I think, for POLIS, but this is a bit more in detail. We could see the obvious effects, but what's interesting is that you could actually see also bike traffic increasing, which is something that was missed by most other traffic cover trackers, so like the Google and Apple trackers. So if you're more interested there, we got more data in this part. Some general observations you can do. You can track red running, like the example I just shared from the website. You can monitor the impact of roadwork. So if there's an intervention here, like you saw for the example, you can see how traffic behaves and how it reroutes to other locations. And these are just a few interesting examples. We also have captured marathons, so a big sports game, like a cycling race in Belgium as well. So that's it, what you can do. So a few first hints, a few first ideas, what you can do with this type of approach. So both with the technology, but definitely together with the citizen science. So with involving the citizens. Now, next steps, what you can do, again, I want to stress this objective. Our objective is also to have self-sustaining citizen science communities with using the Telegram WeCount approach that we're developing now. So we're halfway in our project. First 2 cases are being deployed, the 3 others are in the course of being deployed. But the end objective is that we can enable anyone in Europe basically to do similar activities on their own. So that's really our objective, and that's also what could be interesting for you. So the question there is, can you set up your own WeCount Telegram network? Yes, but of course there's always a but. You need to understand that there's a lot of guidance needed for the participating citizens. You can't just dump the sensor on them and just harvest data. It doesn't work that way. You need to help them with it is still technology. You need to help them with data interpretation. So you need to make clear that why you have higher peaks in this time and that time. I mean, these are things that citizens will want to know, and you have to engage with them. And of course, it has to sit into a wider engagement strategy. You can't just use, again, I can't stress this enough, you can't just use the citizens as free data providers. If you want to help, want to harvest that data, you need to involve them properly. So just a few thoughts for people who are considering to working with this type of activities with citizen science. It's definitely a good approach. It's definitely something which has a lot of potential, but we already see here. So for example, Leuven will use WeCount/Telegram as their key element to assess impact assessment. So apart from the classical counting technologies. But yeah, because you involve citizens, it provides an opportunity to create also support for whatever you want to do in terms of policy change. But it's also a challenge. You need to involve them properly. You can't just use them again as free data collectors. So you would not be the first if you want to start. There are plenty other examples of cities, mostly local, small cities, who are using Telegram to collect traffic data, but also to engage their citizens in the discussion of local transport policy development. So very briefly, that was it from my side. I think it's now time for Giovanni and Lucia to dive a bit more into one specific case. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kris. And indeed, the continuation of the introduction of the WeCount project is going to be through the case study in Spain, Barcelona and Madrid. And the presenters are going to be Giovanni Maccani. He's a senior researcher at Ideas for Change. He has been an assistant professor and lecturer in management information systems at the National University of Ireland and Maynooth. He achieved a bachelor and a master in engineering, both at the Polytechnic University of Milan. And he earned a PhD in information systems at the University in Ireland. His research domain covers concepts of smart cities, urban IT governance, design science, and citizen science. His colleague, Lucia Errandonea, is a civic engagement consultant at Ideas for Change. She is a political scientist specialized in participatory design and management of city and community projects. She holds a master's degree in new trends and innovation process in communication in Spain and smart communities design and management in Italy. At Ideas for Change, she coordinates different European projects in the field of citizen science and environmental health. And the floor is yours, Giovanni and Lucia.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Balázs. Thanks very much, Kris. And thanks very much, everyone, to be here. So I'm going to share my screen and our presentation. Okay, so once again, my name is Giovanni Maccani. Together with Lucia Errandonea, today we'll be talking a little bit about what we've been doing over the last few months in the Spanish pilot of WeCount. So Kris mentioned it. So the pilot or the case study in Spain is being guided by what we call the WeCount engagement framework, which is really how we plan to undertake citizen science work in the context of traffic counting and sustainable mobility. So this framework really tells you and gives you guidance on how to engage citizens in every step of this scientific research investigation. So from the very beginning, since you formulate the problem that you want to tackle in relation to traffic counting and sustainable mobility, through the co-design of the intervention, data collection, participatory data analysis, to the co-creation of proposals for public policies, and final action, reflection, and legacy. So at the moment in Spain, we are doing data collection. We just entered the data collection phase, and we will be telling you a little bit more how we got there, what were our resources that we developed, and the activities that we made, and also some of the challenges that we've experiencing so far. Brilliant. So scoping and co-design. So as I said, really, the citizen science intervention needs to put a lot of focus in problem formulation. So this is not only because mobility, sustainable mobility and traffic counting is a complex issue indeed, and it actually can affect a lot of different aspects of our lives, from contamination to roads safety, speed compliance, but also time, insights around urban design, space management, and so on. But really also because citizen science really focuses on interventions that are really context specific, right? So citizens are involved if they investigate an issue that they care about and they're experiencing in their everyday lives, right? So what did we do? So first we went out with a citywide survey in both Madrid and Barcelona, and we were generally asking people what concerns you the most around these elements around mobility. How much does mobility concern you? What is the situation in your street, in your neighborhood? And so we could gather a general understanding of what people cared about, right? So, and in this first phase, it already emerged that noise pollution and air quality were the issues that people were mostly interested in. So that kind of guided the pilots itself, right? Then what we did was we organized dedicated participatory problem formulation workshops, right? So we engaged with communities, we were asking them, during the day, what are your experiences? What are your perceptions about mobility-related problems in your street, in your neighborhood, and during the year? So by doing that, we're reaching a very granular understanding of the problems experienced by people, as well as their perceptions around mobility in their neighborhood, that we could contrast upon with the data collected through the Telegram sensor. This was also complemented with a comprehensive stakeholder mapping exercise that we did. It's really to identify what public sector agencies could improve or extend the application of the project, or could be the recipient of the outcomes of this case study, as well as other industries and education entities that could collaborate throughout our journey. Then an important part of our engagement strategy was what we call the beta pilot and our approach to community building, which is follows what we call an infrastructuring approach, or a train-the-trainer approach. So what we did was, between the months of March and May 2020, we undertook a 90-day sprint of the methodology, in which we picked 20 existing community champions, and we ran through all the phases of the WeCount intervention. This was done not only for us to learn about the process, to test the resources that we were developing for engagement, and also to test the technology and how it adapted to the Barcelona and Madrid cases. But most importantly was really to do this infrastructuring approach that I've mentioned, which is really engage community champions, transfer them the knowledge about how to install the sensor, how to run this type of case study, so that they could autonomously involve their own communities in an informed way and run their own pilots in an autonomous manner. So this was a very good experience for us. We started our community building with this 90-day sprint, but we figured out that we had several issues in our journey. First one is related to urban design. So Madrid and Barcelona, as depicted in these pictures, I suppose, are a bit different than Belgium, where the technology was initially tested and implemented. So here there's a lot of trees, buildings are typically higher. So the finding suitable participants has been a big challenge. And so focusing on specific areas and their issues was not feasible from the offset. Another one was obviously COVID. Kris mentioned it very well. We moved everything online. This changed completely our strategy, which would include a lot of hands-on activities. We developed resources on the go, such as this one, that is what we call the WeCount kit, step-by-step installation guide. Kits are being distributed at home with bikers in both Madrid and Barcelona. We had to develop additional tutorials and onboarding resources, especially for older adults that we've learned during our beta pilot might have issues during the installation process. And now we dive into data collection, and I'll hand it over to Lucia that will tell us more about that.
Yeah, thank you. So now at the Barcelona and Madrid pilot, we are in the data collection phase. And one thing that, please, you can change the slide. One thing that we learned in the beta pilot is that people wanted to combine traffic data with air pollution. Here in Barcelona and Madrid, people are really interested in air pollution. It's a key issue in environmental scope. So one thing that we did is to collaborate with another project that use biosensors that are strawberry plants as sensors to gather information of air pollution. These plants are like in the leaves, all the compounds of the air pollution are measured, and then to applying biomagnetic analysis techniques, you can find, you can get an air pollution measurement. So this idea of this project could combine with the data analysis that we will get from the Telegram, and this also help us to reach people that are not tech people, and also the ones that couldn't be part of the project because they didn't have a good view of their window. And this is something that gain a lot of visibility, and people really want to be part of the project. And please go to the next one. So now we are in the data collection deployment. We are distributing the kits, as Giovanni said, with bikers, because we wanted to have the minimum impact. And we are also giving to the participants the possibility to install the sensor with all the materials and resources that we have developed online. And also we have created and organized some clinics for those that are having problems with the installation. So right now, if you can go to the next one, please, Gio. Right now we are 660 members in the platform and 58 active users at the moment in Madrid and Barcelona. And we will have 2.5 more months of data collection. And we hope to have a really good data gathering. So if you go to the next one. So the next steps are to have, as Kris said, we are going to organize participatory analysis with the citizens, not only for just to correlate all the information that we have gathered in these months, but also to make sense of this data. For us, it's really important also because we have different communities with different interests. So for example, we have schools, and schools are really interested in some, for example, speeding, but also with the kind of the type of traffic that are in the school or around the school, or the security. The next thing that we will organize is like some kind of workshops to co-design proposals for informing a new policy, a public policy with this data. And with all these results, we will have a final event that we hope to have it in February, to present all these results with all the stakeholders involved. So this is it. I don't know if you can go. If you have any question, please, we are open to it. Thank you.
Indeed, we are going to answer all the questions after all the presentation has been presented. Thank you for the presentation, Giovanni and Lucia. And I would like to give the floor to Enda, who is the professor at University of the West of England, Bristol, a professor of air quality and carbon management, and has been working on environmental challenges for more than 20 years. His core research is on air pollution science and policy, and Enda was the technical director of the ClairCity project, in which he's going to give a presentation for us. Enda, the floor is yours.
Okay, can I just check you can see my screen okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to give you an overview of another citizen science public engagement project called ClairCity, which was also funded under Horizon 2020. The project has just ended a couple of months ago, so we're still quite busy in terms of writing up the final results. Now, the central aim of ClairCity was to try and create a shift in the public understanding around the causes of air quality. And in particular, what we wanted to focus on was putting citizens' day-to-day behaviors, day-to-day practices, day-to-day activities at the heart of the debate. And by actually putting people into that, we wanted to try and give them ownership of the problem and subsequently ownership of the solutions, and actually empower them to have a say in what their future city would look like. And we tried to do this across 4 cities and 2 regions. And the main reason for that is diversity. As we know, every city is going to have its different challenges, its different air pollution sources. It's going to have different demographics, different capacities, different data sets. So we wanted to create a process which was scientifically robust, but also flexible and adaptable enough that it could be used in other cities and other regions, similar to WeCount in that regard. So the core concept, if we think about air pollution, we tend to think about very traditional approaches that are quite technocentric in the way we analyze air pollution, and also in terms of the policies we might want to implement. And what we think about is really the where and the what. So the where being the geographical locations where we have air pollution hotspots, or where limit values or national air quality objectives are being exceeded, and the what being the sources of that pollution. So cars, industry, domestic, it could be cars, buses, HGVs, Euro standards, petrol versus diesel. This is a very technical conversation. So what ClairCity was trying to do is shifting from the where and the what more towards the who and the why. Who is generating pollution? Different genders, different ages, different socioeconomic status, and indeed why they are doing it. So their day-to-day behaviors, traveling to work, taking kids to school, leisure time, shopping, all of those reasons why we might get behind the wheel of the car. So moving from a very technocentric approach to really trying to put people into local air quality management. Obviously, it was a 4-year EU project, so I can't cover it all, but I am going to focus on 3 particular aspects. One was a game or an app that we generated where the citizen becomes the mayor of a city, and that allowed us to kind of crowdsource the public acceptability of different interventions, and also to analyze why people make certain decisions. A second approach was a citizen Delphi, where we worked with different citizens' assemblies and different citizen groups to basically understand the barriers or why they feel entrenched in certain patterns of behavior, and then to give them a voice in terms of thinking about a different future for their city. And then finally, some work that we did actually with Kris Vanherle led this work, who spoke earlier, around the source apportionment of pollution by different demographics and travel motives. So the Skylines game, we wanted to set ourselves a challenge whereby we're creating a serious game, but also a game that was fun, a game that would allow us to harness, capture, inform, and challenge people. And ultimately, we came to the decision of making the player the mayor of a city, and that they have to move around the city and collect different policy ideas that get presented to them. And every idea that they turn from an idea into a policy would then have an impact on the city in terms of the environment and in terms of the economy, but also an impact on citizens in terms of satisfaction and health. And this is ultimately what the game looked like. You had to move around different areas of the city in which you would be presented with 2 ideas. You take one of these ideas and put it into your briefcase, and then every 5 years you go back to the town hall and those ideas become policies. Now, each one of those ideas would then have an influence on the 4 attributes you see here: carbon, air quality and health, citizen satisfaction, and the city economy. If you won, you played. If you won, great. You can play again to try and be quicker, or maybe to keep more money in the bank, or keep satisfaction higher. But ultimately, you're trying to improve carbon emissions and health and air quality. Now, behind the game itself, there was a policy library which had over 500 different policies that had both a positive and a negative effect in terms of these different attributes. And these ideas or policies were mined from a number of different sources and databases that were already out there, but they were also mined from the citizen Delphi, the ideas that came from the citizens themselves and that fed into that process. Each idea was then categorized at different levels. So the source sector, the subsector, the different policy type and the responsible authority, and then each was scored on a scale of 1 to 10. So as you're moving around the city, you can start to see how the policies you implement vary those different attributes, but also the area of the city start to change. So on the left-hand side, we've got a happy, clean, or sorry, on the right-hand side, we've got a happy, clean-looking city, whereas on the left-hand side, things are going quite bad. You can see there's a little man walking around coughing, cracks in the buildings. They're starting to decay because we're running out of money. We're running out of or air pollution is also getting poor in the area. So people got a sense of how the decisions they made affected their local city. Each player then was given a unique ID, and this allowed us a little bit later to start to analyze decisions made by different age groups, by different genders, by the certain amount of knowledge that they might have around air quality. And we could also look at the data from the point of view of different cities, or look at it collectively. We made 6 versions of the game. The reason for that is we wanted the games to feel familiar to a local audience. So each one of these buildings looks like a building or a landmark of their city. And also, one of the challenges often with kind of public engagement and citizen engagement activity is trying to reach the non-typical audience. So we changed all the games into local languages so that we could maybe be a little bit more inclusive in terms of different audiences and getting them involved. We had over 4,000 downloads, 11,000 plays, 80,000 different policies chosen by the players. What was interesting from the data that came out of it is that we saw about a 60-40 split in terms of male versus female. We thought it would be more skewed towards male, so we were quite encouraged to see more of a female audience engaging with it. And also, we thought it would be skewed towards more of a younger generation. And actually, we saw fairly even levels all the way up to kind of the 35 to 40 or 35 to 50 age category, suggesting that kind of game technology and gamification can reach a much larger audience than just young males. So the data that came out of it, we can use this. So this is all generated by the players, by the citizens, and we can use that data in terms of our specific cities, where we can create rankings about the public acceptability or preference of different policy areas. And then given the ClairCity policy database, we can start to see what transport policies are there, whether they're more orientated towards active travel or public transport, who the responsible authority is, what type of intervention it is, so we can look into that type of detail in much more, or that type of information in more detail, which we then took forward to inform some of the scenarios that we developed. Also, thinking across the data, we can actually start to look at it in terms of gender. For example, what we found is the game players is that female players were more likely to choose behavior change and societal change policy options, whereas the male players tend to be more orientated towards the harder, technical, expensive options. What we actually found is that male players failed the game far more often than female players, simply because they ran out of money. They went too techie, too much, and they ran out of money. What was quite interesting as well, not just looking at the policies that were chosen, but also looking at the policies that were rejected. And you start to get a real insight into the kind of thinking around citizens in different areas. We're also able to provide information thinking about if you're developing communication strategies, how do you start to communicate these types of interventions? And what we're finding is that people were much more likely to choose interventions that had a positive effect on their own satisfaction and a positive effect on health rather than economy or an environmental output. So if you're thinking about communication strategies, targeting those particular emotions, if you like, can actually improve the uptake of these interventions. So it wasn't just about game data. That gives you it gives you a large data set, but it's quite abstract. We wanted to actually also hear the citizen voice. So we implemented a citizen Delphi process. And Delphi is a process whereby you go through different rounds of engagement with a group, with an expert group or a citizen assembly. And you start with very broad questions, you know, what would you like your future transport to look like? And gradually, as you move through the rounds, you start to find that common themes and common issues start to emerge. And in doing so, you can start to get to the point of reaching consensus about different approaches, different policies, and different interventions. So really, from a public engagement point of view, it's a sweet spot. It was that collaboration process where we're moving beyond simply transmitting data or going through a consultation process, but actually collaborating with citizen groups to generate data. And we started to find quotes like this in terms of why people feel entrenched in certain behaviors. Insufficient public transport, too expensive, crowded. The need for flexibility, it takes twice as long to drive. A lack of facilities at work, so no lockup or no showers or no places to store a bicycle. A perception issue in that people may not think their boss would like them sweating at a desk, and as safety concerns. And some of these perceived barriers to kind of shifts in modal patterns is perceived, and a lot of it can be overcome by better communication. And some of these are actually real barriers that people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives. And these were the reasons why people were getting behind the wheel of the car. And that allows us to kind of make the shift, if you like, from this very, again, clear but technical viewpoint of air pollution in the city. This is Bristol, in which we have a very obvious focus on diesel cars and on commuting traffic, which I'll come to a little bit later. But it allows us to create a different perspective. It allows us to think about things like accessibility, childcare needs, flexibility, and my ultimate favorite one, what do I know about Euro standards? I just use my car to drive to the shops. So if we are thinking about interventions that encourage modal shift, then we need to break away from that very technical viewpoint of air pollution and actually start to think about the thing that people can connecting with, the one they are experts in, which is their own day-to-day lives and behaviors. So finally, then putting people into the data, we've got our game, we've got our qualitative data. We also wanted to think about the kind of quantitative elements. And this is, as I mentioned, was the work that Kris and his colleagues at TML led for us. And ultimately, it's recognizing that no two individuals are the same, their behaviors are different, the factors that influence their behaviors are different. So what we did was we put a behavioral element, if you like, to a traditional emission inventories approach, whereby we started to think about things like working, shopping, education. And I'm sure Kris can talk about this a little bit later if needed, but basically what we did was we merged emissions inventory data with travel survey data, with local population data. And by doing so, we were able to come up with a fusion that allowed us to generate data that looked like this. So this allows us to look in this particular mode by different modes. We've actually put this data set into a Microsoft Power BI file so that the public can play with it and interact with it and click on different links and see what happens with the data. But this is, you can click on the car or the bus or the motorcycle, and you can see how it varies by different ages, by different incomes, by different genders, and by different purpose. We did the same by different motives, so different behaviors, if you like, commuting, work, travel, personal, business. And again, you can start to click on each one of these links and see how your CO2 emissions start to change. We did it by gender, so male versus female, and again, age, income, and purpose starts to vary. And then going back to my earlier graphic about NOx, we also start to think about combinations here. So in this particular case, we have got NOx emissions by two modes of traffic, cars and buses, by three different household income categories, less than 25K, 25 to 50, and above 50, and by different motives. Now, in terms of the income point, in terms of the mode point of view, we knew cars were the dominant issue in Bristol. In terms of income, it reflected a national data sets that we've seen, which basically says the richer you are, the more likely you are to create pollution, but the least likely you are to be exposed to it. And the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be exposed to pollution, but the least likely you are to generate it. So that reflected a national picture. But what was really interesting here from a policy point of view for the council is that their transport action plan was devised around diesel cars and was predominantly devised around commuting to work, so that morning and afternoon peak. But what we saw from our data analysis was that leisure time and shopping accounted for almost 50% of the NOx emissions in the city. So really they needed to think differently from a behavioral perspective as to how they might address this issue. So what do we do with this data? We brought it all together, as well as other baseline and policy analysis workshop or data sets. We use them in terms of raising awareness. We use them in terms of getting a better understanding of social practices and behaviors, about public perceptions of the problem and indeed the solutions, about constraints and opportunities. And then we actually worked with the citizens to create scenarios, future scenarios for transport and domestic energy in particular, and a series of final quantified policy packages for each one of our cities. So I think from the ClairCity project, what we've found is that citizen scientists can absolutely become fantastic citizen advocates for change if you provide them with the platform to have their voice and have their say. Too often, I think we talk about the science policy dialogue, but we really need to put the public into the heart of that debate. And this quote that's in bold, you know, the need for enabling policies that break down social barriers so that greener choices become the social norms for everybody, I think we'd all agree with. But to get to that point, you must understand how social practices influence the generation of pollution. We must understand how social practices influence the individual and ultimately stop blaming individuals for their lack of willingness to change. You can only get to that point if you talk to people. You have to go and engage with them. In terms of engagement mechanisms, what we've learned from the project is, number one, know your audience and actually connect to their lived experience. Don't dictate to them. It's actually more important to listen than it is to talk. Find common ground in terms of discussion of the challenges you're trying to reach, and also think about different mechanisms. You know, the way a young person will engage with this conversation would be very different from a family of 4 or a single parent with 2 kids or a retired couple. You know, you need to think about different engagement pathways and the continuation of that engagement. You can't just engage with them, get the data, and then run away. You have to think about the legacy of this engagement. In terms of the policy making, what we actually found and the feedback we got from the local councils was that the bottom-up citizen-led approach actually raised the ambition levels in terms of what they thought they could do regarding interventions. And actually the policymakers felt a little bit braver, a little bit more empowered to be more ambitious, to push the envelope a little bit in terms of the changes that they're willing to change and how quickly they could bring them into action. But one thing I will say is that you do need a little bit of ground truthing for these scenarios. Citizens can come up with, they didn't come up with anything new. There was no blue sky intervention that came into place, but what they did do is push targets and push the ambition levels. But sometimes you actually need to reflect on that and make sure that it's not just challenging, but also realistic. Certainly what we found from the project is that citizen voice and that citizen engagement is essential, and it goes beyond just traditional consultation. It allows for real collaboration and real change, and it allows citizens to then be the voice that pushes going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Enda, for the presentation. Very interesting. We finished the presentations at this point. So I would still encourage the audience to ask questions about WeCount or ClairCity. But as I saw that you already answered most of the questions during the presentation, so I'm not going to ask them again. But I do have some questions to you while we wait for some questions from the audience. So Kris, if I could ask you that, do you have any examples? How can we ensure that the efforts of the citizens who are part of the project as WeCounts are taken into account by stakeholders in concrete steps?
Yeah, this is a good one because yeah, this is obviously the end goal, as I said in my introduction, of the WeCount objectives. If you can't use this, what we're doing in the project, to actually generate some policy change, why even bother? So what we have seen emerging evidence of this one particular case in Leuven for these roadblocks. This is one example. So specifically, this is a policy intervention which has been tested and which has been verified with this type of data, and that's where we want to end up, to use this in a systematic way, and also lift this citizen science image, let's say, which is more like a techie atmosphere, out of this amateuristic area to have like full proper value also for policy development. So yeah, we have emerging evidence and we have high hopes that we will do this with WeCount further in other cases.
You're muted, Balázs.
Sorry. Indeed, I wanted to ask the same question from Giovanni and Lucia. What is the case in Barcelona? Did you already inform the local stakeholders what's happening in WeCount?
Yeah, well, Surely, we did a comprehensive stakeholder mapping exercise, I guess, at the very beginning. And I guess in every citizen science project aimed at improving local policies, the first effort you should do is really to get on board the public authority, not just to ensure that your results would be properly disseminated or properly uptaken, but really to make sure that you keep the relevancy for them throughout the journey, right? So we have officially established a partnership with Media Lab Prado, which is within Madrid City Council. We do have several other industries that are more or less on board. I guess their involvement is usually not formal. So we get commitment, we get their desire to be part of the workshops and to give presentations. But I guess the main partnerships we have at the moment are with Madrid City Council and with some communities that are already established across the two cities.
Sounds great, thank you. Then I also have a question for Enda. As you mentioned, ClairCity is already ended during this summer. If I can ask you to briefly conclude a measurable positive impact of the project, what would you highlight? I think Enda is frozen.
In a very nice state, very nice state.
Okay, then probably Enda is not going to answer to us, maybe later. But I do see that we have a question from the audience. So I would like to point that to you, Kris, Giovanni, and Lucia. And the question is, have you had any obstacle with national governments and centralized policy making? How would you suggest to overcome that?
Yeah, a very brief reply already, but I'll do it plenary. I think it's easier. So what we see is that, well, if you involve citizens directly in evidence gathering and policy development, yeah, you have to relinquish control in a sense as a policymaker. Eh? So, and that's something which is maybe not that well easily done by a policymaker. So there's a well-known process of I mean, citizen consultation and testing and some technical analysis and so on. If you go via this path with WeCount and ClairCity, involving citizens directly in the co-creation, but also evidence gathering, yeah, you have to, you lose some kind of control there. And I think it's a perception issue, because I think you can still navigate, you can still steer all the discussion in the right direction, and the benefits are huge, obviously, because if you really have people on board from the start, then they also help you building the trust or the support for any intervention. You know, if you do something on mobility, and that's just opening a can of worms, so you need to involve them directly. So I think that's a bit of an obstacle. And apart from that, maybe still, because it's low cost, it's citizen science, so the reliability of the output is still sometimes into questions, though we can prove with data that, I mean, in most cases the data is of sufficient quality to be of use for assessment, particularly for assessment of changes. But that's a constant battle, and I think it's something which every citizen science and low-cost activity has. You have to prove that it's more than just a gimmick. It's actually providing robust data and impacts. So those are the two I can think of.
I may add on that, based on our experience. I guess a citizen science project beyond mobility, really, they usually take either one or another direction at the very beginning. So if you have support from the local authority, that's the best option. So ensure relevancy, as I was saying before, right? But sometimes you just don't have it. You don't get a response. And in that case, the intervention itself shapes into more a protest, into more an activist sort of intervention or action from citizens. And in that case, they still, from the local government, they still play a role based on our ability to make them the recipient of the final results, I suppose, of what an intervention might be. But this would be the two general cases. Sometimes also, while we're dealing with the public sector, which is complex organizations, their attitude is not always towards innovation. It's not always easy to work with public sector. It depends really on the people, the programs they have in place. So I think local is easier than national, especially for the types of intervention that we do that are very much situated. But that's pretty much my opinion on this, I suppose.
Lucia, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I will. Something that happens to us in the Barcelona pilot, for example, in the Madrid and Barcelona pilot, is that some techniques that some people that are involved in the government, but not as government members, but as citizens involved and really concerned about traffic, they start like helping us to get more people, and to they are really involved, but in the other way, not as members of the government, but as citizens concerned. And this gives you like some granularity to get in to the government side, but in the other way, as in a bottom-up approach. So this is something that happened, and for me, it was really interesting to highlight here.
Thank you so much. In the meantime, we got an interest from a bicycle association from the north of France. They are interested about the Terram network. He represents a citizen organization, so he wants to develop the network, and it's a bit difficult to understand, but anyway, he's interested about WeCount. So
I can answer this one, Balázs, if you want.
Yeah.
So we have questions like this pretty often. So there are also requests for like Telegram, small Telegram networks elsewhere. So we have a high. Well, we have a lot of funding for in the WeCount to do like proper and full engagement activities, and also tool development in WeCount for the 5 cases. But obviously we also want to do this like smaller networks elsewhere. So I would advise to contact us. So go to the Telegram website. I think that's best. And then just briefly explain what you exactly want to do, and we can see if we can help you. There are several options. You can go completely solo with a few devices, and then you have to work your way through it yourself or with some local partner, or there can be some more hands-on support. But I would advise to go for info@telegram.net for this particular question. Balázs, if I may, I answered also a question on the accuracy in the chat, but I also want to state this explicitly. This is obviously one of the questions that we get very often. Again, low-cost sensor, so what's the quality? We are very much aware of this. We have a full article on our webpage, the Telegram webpage, that is, on the technology, on accuracy. There's manual count verified with manual for 1 hour compared to what the Telegram device did, and there's a verification with pneumatic tubes. So that means continuous counting for several hours on end for 3 or 4 locations. So in short, but I really recommend to check the article. It's completely detailed. In short, if it's a suitable location, if it's a good location without issue, then the median deviation is about 10% for cars. We see a bit of higher deviation if you compare to pneumatic tubes, but that's of course because tubes themselves have also some inherent inaccuracy. So in principle, we get a 90% accuracy for cars, which is more than good enough to see changes in patterns and so on. And basically, as a transport specialist, we're happy with these numbers.
Great. At this point, I have to close the webinar because we are a bit over time. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for the panelists for the presentation, and thank you for the audience that they became part of this webinar and they were interested about citizen science and the 2 projects. And if you want to get more information about the projects, you can also follow our Twitter page and subscribe to our newsletter. And you can also write to us, of course, if you have any more questions. Thank you again, and have a nice afternoon.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Bye.